The void between stars had never looked so dark. Marcus Sullivan stood at the observation window of the space station, watching the emptiness stretch out forever. Behind him, alarms continued to sound softly, warning of things that had already happened too far away to stop. The station orbited Earth like a guardian that had failed its duty. 300 people worked here doing their jobs, trying to pretend that the world below was still safe. It was not safe anymore. The galaxy had changed in the last 3 years. When Marcus was younger, the universe seemed full of possibility. Humans had joined the great community of stars. Other species had taught them languages and mathematics. There was trade, there was peace, and there was promise. Then the Varathi came and everything changed into nightmare. The Varathi were not like other aliens. They did not negotiate or offer terms. They arrived at planets and took what they wanted. Entire worlds went silent. Millions of people vanished. Scientists and historians said the Varathi had existed for millions of years, sleeping in the dark places between galaxies. Now they were awake and they were hungry. Marcus turned away from the window and moved through the corridors of the station. The walls hummed with the sound of life support systems and computers. Young officers and technicians moved past him, each one focused on their own tasks. They all knew what was happening. The Varathi fleet was getting closer to Earth every day. It was only a matter of time before they arrived. He reached the command center and stepped inside. Lisa was already there, sitting at the communications console. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been working communications for 5 years and knew how to find signal in chaos. Marcus had come to depend on her completely. Lisa looked up at him. Her expression told him what he needed to know before she even spoke. Another colony had gone dark. This time it was Kepler Station, a mining operation that had been home to 15,000 people. 15,000 more voices that would never speak again. 15,000 families that would never see home. Marcus felt something break inside him. He had received these messages before, each one smaller than the last. Each one bringing the Varathi closer to Earth. The calculations were simple and terrible. At this rate, the Varathi would reach humanity's homeworld in less than 3 months. 3 months to save a world of 12 billion people. 3 months to find an answer. The station's main communication channel suddenly came to life. The Supreme Council of United Earth was calling. Marcus knew what this meant. They had been giving him time to find a solution, but time was ending. He moved to the command chair and accepted the transmission. The face of Chairman Robert Gregory appeared on the screen. The chairman looked like a man who had not slept in days. His eyes were hollow and his voice was tight with tension. He told Marcus that the evacuation plans were being activated. The most important cultural and scientific records of humanity were being moved to underground bunkers on Earth. Governments were being relocated to secure facilities. The message was clear. They were giving up on defense. They were moving toward survival mode. Marcus understood what the chairman was really saying. If Marcus could not find a way to stop the Varathi, then humanity would go underground. They would hide beneath the Earth and hope that the Varathi would eventually leave. It was a strategy born of desperation, and everyone knew it would not work. The Varathi did not give up hunting. They always found their prey. After the transmission ended, Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. Lisa and the other officers in the command center watched him carefully, waiting to see what he would do. Marcus had never felt so alone. Even though he was surrounded by people, he had been given an impossible task. He had to either find a way to stop an enemy that had never been stopped before, or admit defeat and watch the world prepare to die. He turned to Lisa and asked if there had been any response to their emergency calls to the older civilizations. The Dalmatians, the Krell, the merchants of the Outer Rim. Surely someone had weapons, had soldiers, had something that could help. Lisa shook her head slowly. Everyone was running. Everyone was scared. No one wanted to stand and fight the Varathi. That night, Marcus could not sleep. He moved through the corridors of the station, thinking about the problem. Somewhere in the vast library of human knowledge, there had to be an answer. Humans were good at thinking their way out of problems. Humans had built civilizations out of stone and mud. They had learned to fly and then to reach the stars. Surely they could find a way to survive this. He found himself in the station's archive section. The computer systems here held copies of every piece of human knowledge that had been digitized. Mathematics, history, art, science, everything. He started searching through records from ancient times when humans first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. He searched through the most recent files looking for anything that might help. By accident or fortune, he discovered a file that had been flagged but never fully processed. It was from Dr. Aaron Patterson, the xenoarchaeologist who worked in the research section of the station. The file contained translations of very old texts, so old that they predated human spaceflight by thousands of years. The texts came from a dead civilization called the Ancients. They had been found on an abandoned world that showed signs of having been destroyed in a war of total devastation. The texts spoke of many things, but one phrase kept appearing. It was written in an old language, but the translation made Marcus stop breathing. The phrase spoke of a species that even the gods feared, a species that had been created as a weapon, a species that was so perfectly designed for war that it had nearly ended the universe itself. The species had a name in the old language, but the ancients had translated it into something simpler. They had called it humanity. Marcus felt his heart pound in his chest. He read the passages again and again. The ancients described this legendary species with words like unstoppable, inevitable, and terrible. They had mentioned that the species had been created in a place between worlds, in a dimension that existed next to normal reality. They had mentioned that this species had nearly destroyed the Varathi themselves thousands of years ago, before being locked away. Marcus knew, in that moment, what he had to do. It was insane. It was dangerous. It violated every protocol of the United Earth Council. But it was the only chance humanity had. He needed to find Dr. Patterson, and together they needed to read every one of those old texts. They needed to understand exactly what had been created and where. They needed to find out if it was possible to open a doorway between dimensions. They needed to see if they could summon creatures that even the gods feared. Marcus moved through the station corridors with new purpose, heading toward the research section. Behind him, the stars continued to shine, and somewhere in the darkness beyond them, the Varathi fleet continued to move toward Earth. Time was running out, and Marcus knew that he was about to do something that would change everything forever. He was about to call for help from legends. He was about to ask for salvation from nightmares. He had no other choice. Dr. Aaron Patterson was in his laboratory when Marcus found him. The laboratory was buried deep within the station, surrounded by ancient computer terminals and walls covered with old texts printed on paper. Books were everywhere, stacked on tables and shelves, some so fragile that they had to be handled with extreme care. Aaron himself was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had dedicated his entire life to studying dead civilizations, and now his life's work might be the key to saving humanity. Aaron looked up from his work when Marcus entered. He seemed unsurprised to see the captain, as if he had been expecting him. Marcus told him that he had read the translation of the ancient texts about the fearsome species. Aaron's face went pale. He stood up slowly and told Marcus to sit down. What Marcus was thinking was dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous idea any human had ever conceived. Marcus explained his plan. He told Aaron that they needed to understand exactly what the ancient texts meant. They needed to find out if the interdimensional species still existed. They needed to discover if there was any way to open a doorway between dimensions and bring them to help humanity. Aaron listened carefully, and when Marcus finished, the old scientist took a deep breath. Aaron told him that he had been studying these texts for 15 years. He had come to some conclusions that he had never shared with anyone because they seemed impossible. The ancient species was real. They had existed thousands of years ago, and according to the texts, they had been sealed away in a pocket dimension after nearly destroying the universe. The sealing was not permanent. It was a temporary lock that was supposed to remain closed only as long as the threat from the Varathi remained dormant. Now that the Varathi were awake and hunting, the lock might be opening on its own. Marcus asked if it was possible to deliberately open the gateway. Aaron walked to a large cabinet and removed several old documents written in the ancient language. He spread them out on the table. The documents contained what appeared to be instructions, a ritual of sorts. However, the ritual required 3 essential things. First, it needed an enormous amount of energy, more energy than any single source on the station could provide. Second, it needed the exact location coordinates which Aaron believed he could extract from the older texts. Third, and most importantly, it needed a sacrifice. Not a sacrifice of lives, but a sacrifice of knowledge. The ritual required sharing something precious with the beings on the other side of the dimension, something that would catch their attention and convince them to help. Marcus thought about what humanity could offer. They had technology, but the interdimensional species would have better technology from thousands of years of existence. They had weapons, but these creatures had been specifically created as weapons. What did humanity have that would matter to beings like that? Aaron smiled and said that humanity had something unique. They had culture, history, art, and knowledge. They had recorded 10,000 years of human experience. They had music, literature, philosophy, and dreams. They had recorded what it meant to be human. Marcus understood immediately. They would use humanity's entire digital archive as the sacrifice. Every book ever written, every song ever composed, every film ever made, every piece of knowledge that humanity had created. They would transmit it all across the dimensional barrier as a gift, as an offering, as proof that humanity was worth saving. The next morning, Marcus called together the station's engineering team. Kevin was the chief engineer, a brilliant man in his early 40s who had worked on the station for 12 years. Kevin had overseen every system, every repair, every modification. He knew the station better than anyone. Marcus told him what they needed to do. Kevin listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished explaining the plan, Kevin was silent for a long moment. Then he asked if Marcus understood what would happen if the ritual went wrong. The energy requirements were so massive that they would have to divert power from every system on the station. Life support would be reduced. The shields would come down. If the gateway opened and the beings on the other side were hostile, the station would be completely defenseless. It would be destroyed instantly. Marcus knew all of this. He also knew that if they did nothing, Earth would be destroyed anyway. At least this way they had a chance. Kevin nodded slowly and told Marcus that he would need a week to prepare. He would have to recalibrate the reactors and redirect every available power source to the gateway mechanism. The 7 days that followed were the longest of Marcus's life. He worked alongside Kevin and the engineering team, helping to prepare the station. He worked alongside Aaron, helping to translate more of the ancient text and extract the exact coordinates needed for the ritual. He worked with Lisa, helping to prepare the digital archive for transmission. They had to compress 10,000 years of human knowledge into a format that could be transmitted across dimensional barriers. It was like trying to fit an entire ocean into a single container. The Supreme Council of United Earth was not told about the plan. Marcus knew that if he told them, they would forbid it. They would be too afraid of the consequences. Instead, he sent them a message telling them to evacuate all personnel from the station except for essential staff. He told them that he was conducting an experiment that might help with the defense. It was not exactly a lie. By the end of the week, everything was ready. Kevin had redirected all the station's power to the gateway mechanism. The ancient texts had been converted into coordinates that the station's computers could understand. The complete digital archive of humanity had been compressed and prepared for transmission. Aaron had spoken with Marcus one more time, reminding him of something important. According to the ancient texts, the beings on the other side of the dimension would judge humanity by what they saw in this archive. They would see humanity's cruelty and violence. They would also see humanity's art, compassion, and beauty. The decision to help would be up to them. On the final day, Marcus called all the remaining personnel to the observation deck. 300 people gathered to watch what was about to happen. Some of them knew what was going on. Most did not. Marcus explained briefly that they were attempting to make contact with an ancient species that might help them fight the Vorathi. He told them that if it worked, humanity would have a chance. If it failed, the station would likely be destroyed. He thanked them for their bravery and asked if anyone wanted to leave. No one moved. They all knew that leaving the station meant abandoning their posts and abandoning Earth. They all chose to stay. At exactly noon, Marcus gave the signal to Kevin. The chief engineer activated the ritual sequence. The station began to shake as massive amounts of energy flowed through every conduit and cable. The lights dimmed as power was diverted away from everything else. The computers hummed and whined with the strain. Aaron monitored the ancient texts, checking the coordinates and the ritual sequence word by word. The air in front of the gateway mechanism began to shimmer and twist. Reality itself seemed to bend and distort. Cracks of light appeared in the space, spreading like lightning. The archive of human knowledge began to transmit, information flowing across the dimensional barrier at speeds that normal computers could not even register. The station shook harder. Alarms sounded, and then everything went silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Marcus held his breath. Then something moved in the shimmer. A shape appeared on the other side of the dimensional barrier. Then another shape. Then another. The gateway was opening. Something was coming through from the other side. Something that would either save humanity or destroy it. The first figure that stepped through the dimensional gateway was like nothing Marcus had ever seen. She was human in shape, with 2 arms and 2 legs, a torso and a head. But everything else about her was wrong in ways that made Marcus's brain struggle to understand what he was looking at. Her eyes glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside. Her skin bore patterns that moved and shifted like living things. Patterns that looked almost like circuit boards or neural networks. When she moved, it was with perfect precision and grace, as if every muscle had been optimized for efficiency beyond what normal humans could achieve. The woman looked at Marcus, and he felt his entire body go rigid. Her gaze was not cruel or hostile, but it was absolutely certain. It was the look of someone who had seen every possible outcome of a situation and had already decided what needed to happen. Behind her, dozens of other figures began to emerge from the gateway. Some were male, some were female. All of them had the same glowing eyes and the same shifting patterns on their skin. All of them moved with the same perfect precision. Commander Victoria was the name the woman gave when Marcus asked who she was. She spoke in English, but her accent was strange, carrying the weight of languages and dialects that had not been spoken for thousands of years. Victoria explained that she and her people had been watching through the dimensional barrier for a very long time. They had seen human civilization rise and fall on many worlds. They had seen the pattern repeat itself over and over. When the Vorathi had awakened, Victoria said, they had been waiting to see if humanity would be brave enough or desperate enough to call for help. Marcus invited Victoria to the command center so they could talk properly. He wanted to understand who these people were and whether they could truly help. Victoria agreed, and together with 20 of her warriors, she followed Marcus through the corridors of the station. The other personnel watched in awe and fear as the interdimensional humans passed by. Some of the crew members tried to touch the patterns on their skin, but Victoria's warriors did not react. They simply kept moving forward, focused and purposeful. In the command center, Marcus offered Victoria food and water, the hospitality that any host would offer a guest. Victoria accepted the water but explained that her people did not need food in the way that normal humans did. Their bodies were engineered to draw energy directly from several different sources, including radiation and electromagnetic fields. This meant that they could survive almost anywhere in the universe in conditions that would kill any other species within seconds. Marcus asked Victoria to explain her people's history. He needed to understand what they were and how they had come to exist. Victoria was silent for a moment, as if she was deciding how much to tell him. Then she began to speak, and her words revealed a history so strange and terrible that Marcus struggled to believe it was true. Victoria explained that her people had not evolved naturally. They had been created by a civilization called the Architects, who had existed billions of years ago. The Architects had been the first true masters of genetic engineering. They could reshape life itself according to their will. When the Vorathi had begun to spread through the galaxy billions of years ago, enslaving other species and establishing themselves as gods, the Architects had decided to create the perfect weapon to stop them. The Architects had engineered an entirely new species from scratch. They had taken human DNA as a base because humans, even in primitive form, had proven to be adaptable and creative, but they had enhanced it beyond anything nature could produce. They had engineered pain receptors that became stronger the more damage was done to the body, turning suffering into fuel for combat. They had engineered a nervous system that could process information and make decisions faster than any computer. They had engineered muscles and bones that could regenerate from almost any injury. They had engineered a mind that could remain focused and logical, even in situations where normal humans would break completely. The result was Victoria's people. They were humans, but they were humans designed for one purpose only: to be unstoppable warriors. The Architects had released them into the galaxy to fight the Vorathi, and for a time it had worked. Victoria's people had driven the Varathi back. They had liberated enslaved species. They had seemed close to victory when something unexpected happened. Victoria's people had begun to realize that they were becoming too much like the Varathi. They had become masters of war, but they were becoming masters of everything else too. Civilizations would surrender without fighting, simply because the presence of Victoria's warriors made resistance seem pointless. The universe itself seemed to fear them. Other species began to call them gods, just as they called the Varathi gods. Victoria's people looked at what they were becoming and made a choice that shocked everyone. They decided to seal themselves away. Together with the most powerful minds among the other species, Victoria's ancestors had created a pocket dimension and imprisoned themselves inside it. They had created a lock that could only be opened if two conditions were met. First, the Varathi would have to awaken again and begin hunting the universe. Second, someone would have to deliberately summon them, proving that they understood what they were calling and accepted the consequences. For millions of years, Victoria's people had waited inside their pocket dimension. They had watched through the barriers between worlds as civilizations rose and fell. They had recorded everything, building a vast library of knowledge and history. When Marcus's call came through the barrier, they had recognized it immediately. They had known what it meant. The Varathi were awake, and someone had been brave or foolish enough to ask for their help. Marcus asked Victoria if she and her people were willing to help humanity fight the Varathi. Victoria answered with a simple yes. She said that humanity was calling, and that was enough. She said that her people understood the cost of what they were doing. They understood that they would become something feared again. They understood that they might become corrupt again. But they also understood that some things were worth fighting for. And humanity, despite all its flaws and weaknesses, was worth fighting for. Over the next week, Victoria and her warriors worked with Kevin's engineering team to understand the station's systems. They worked with Dr. Patterson to understand Earth's defenses. They worked with Lisa to coordinate communications between the station and the surface. The more Marcus watched them work, the more he understood what the ancient texts had really meant. Victoria's people could not be tired. They could not be discouraged. They could not be broken. When an engineer would make a mistake, they would simply correct it and move forward. When a problem seemed unsolvable, they would find a way around it. They were not invincible in the sense that they could not be hurt. Victoria explained that pain was their constant companion. But pain was just information. It was feedback. It made them stronger and more determined. Marcus spent long hours talking with Victoria, learning about her world inside the pocket dimension. She told him about their cities, which had been built to survive anything. She told him about their philosophy, which was based on the simple principle that existence was struggle, and that struggle had meaning. She told him about the people she had left behind when she came through the gateway. Millions of her kind had chosen to wait, to see if the first contingent would succeed before committing more resources to helping humanity. By the end of the week, Marcus realized something important. Victoria and her people were not gods, despite what others had called them. They were simply warriors who had been engineered to be the best. They had flaws and doubts just like any other being, but they had learned how to move forward despite those doubts. They had learned how to keep fighting even when everything seemed impossible. They were exactly what humanity needed, and humanity was exactly what they needed too, because Victoria's people had been alone for so long that they had nearly forgotten what they were fighting for. Now, with humans beside them, they remembered. They remembered that life was about more than just surviving. Life was about protecting those who could not protect themselves, and that was worth everything. The Varathi fleet arrived exactly when the sensors had predicted they would. 300 massive warships descended through space like locusts approaching a harvest. Each ship was the size of a small mountain, bristling with weapons that could obliterate entire cities in seconds. The fleet had crushed every resistance humanity had put up. The fleet had destroyed every colony that had tried to fight back. The fleet had never encountered an enemy it could not defeat. Marcus stood in the command center and watched the approaching ships on the main display. Lisa sat at her station, monitoring all communication channels. Kevin was down in engineering, ready to execute the battle plan. Dr. Patterson was in the observation deck, watching the stars and praying in his own way. Victoria stood beside Marcus, completely calm, her glowing eyes fixed on the advancing Varathi ships. Victoria turned to Marcus and spoke quietly. She said that the Varathi always attacked the same way. They would establish a perimeter around the planet and the station. They would demand surrender. When the demand was refused, they would begin their systematic destruction of all defenses. It was a pattern they had perfected over millions of years. But patterns could be broken if you understood them well enough. Marcus gave the signal to Kevin. The engineering team activated the first part of their plan. The station's reactors, which had been rebuilt and modified by Victoria's warriors, began to emit a pulse of energy that spread outward in all directions. The pulse did not damage anything, but it created a tear in the fabric of space itself. For just a moment, the Varathi sensors would see multiple false readings. Their targeting systems would become confused. In that moment of confusion, Victoria's warriors moved. They had already placed themselves throughout the station in perfect positions. Some were in the docking bays. Some were in the weapons control centers. Some were standing in the observation ports looking out at space itself. When Victoria gave the signal, they all moved at once, stepping through the small dimensional gates that her people had created in secret. The gates opened on the hulls of the nearest Varathi ships. The battle was not what anyone expected. There were no grand explosions or massive exchanges of fire. Instead, the interdimensional warriors simply appeared on the Varathi vessels and began to shut them down from the inside. They moved through the corridors of enemy ships like ghosts, appearing and disappearing as if they could step between the moments of time itself. The Varathi soldiers fought back with everything they had, but they were fighting an enemy that had been engineered specifically to be unstoppable. One Varathi soldier, standing in a corridor of the lead warship, saw a warrior appear directly in front of him. The soldier fired his weapon, a beam of concentrated energy that could cut through reinforced steel. The beam struck the warrior directly in the chest. The warrior did not fall. The warrior did not even slow down. The wound in her chest glowed with blue light for a moment, and then the damage simply reversed itself. Her body healed as the soldier watched in horror. Then she reached out and touched his weapon, and it crumbled to dust. The Varathi fleet began to realize something was very wrong. Ship after ship went dark as Victoria's warriors disabled their systems. The massive computers that controlled each vessel were being shut down in perfect sequence. The weapon systems that had seemed so invincible were being rendered useless. The Varathi commander ordered a full retreat. The fleet began to move backward, trying to escape the dimensional gates and the warriors that kept appearing from nowhere. But Victoria's people had already planned for the retreat. They had positioned more warriors in the path of the fleeing ships. They had created barriers in space itself that the Varathi ships could not pass through. The retreat turned into a rout. The once proud fleet that had seemed so unstoppable was suddenly running for its life. Marcus watched from the command center as the battle unfolded. He watched as 300 Varathi warships were systematically dismantled by fewer than 300 interdimensional warriors. He watched as the invincible enemy suddenly became the prey. He felt tears running down his face because he understood what he was witnessing. He was witnessing the moment when humanity stopped being victims. He was witnessing the moment when the galaxy learned that there were forces in the universe that were stronger than the Varathi. One of the Varathi ships attempted to jump to hyperspace, trying to escape to a distant part of the galaxy. Before the jump could complete, Victoria appeared on the bridge of that ship. The Varathi commander there was a being of immense age and power, a general who had commanded troops for thousands of years. He looked at Victoria and asked her who she was. Victoria answered simply. She said she was the thing that the universe feared. She said she was the species that had been created to end empires. She said she was the reason the gods had gone into hiding. The Varathi general tried to negotiate. He offered wealth. He offered knowledge. He offered technology and power and everything that a being could desire. He asked Victoria what terms she would accept to end the violence. Victoria was silent for a moment, and then she spoke words that would spread through the entire galaxy within days. She said that the Varathi had made their choice when they chose to hunt humanity. She said there would be no negotiation. She said there would be no terms. There would only be ending. By the time the battle was over, 280 of the 300 Varathi ships had been destroyed or disabled beyond repair. The remaining 20 ships were fleeing at maximum speed, their commanders sending emergency signals back to their homeworld, warning their people about what had happened. The interdimensional warriors had suffered injuries, but none of them had been killed. Some of them had taken damage so severe that normal humans would have died instantly. But Victoria's people simply kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept winning. Marcus authorized Kevin to power down the battle systems. He authorized Lisa to monitor the fleeing Varathi ships and confirm their departure. He authorized Dr. Patterson to begin documenting everything that had happened so that the record would be preserved. And then Marcus went to meet Victoria as she returned to the command center through one of the dimensional gates. Victoria was covered in the blue blood of Varathi soldiers. Her armor, which seemed to be alive and responsive to her needs, was repairing itself even as Marcus watched. She looked at Marcus with those glowing eyes and told him that the immediate threat had been eliminated. The Varathi fleet in this sector of space had been broken, but there were more Varathi out there, in other places, and they would eventually need to be dealt with as well. Marcus asked if Victoria's people would stay to help humanity defend Earth and the colonies. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. She said that her people would stay for now but not forever. She explained that they could not remain in normal space for too long. Their presence changed things. Other species began to fear them again. Other civilizations began to see them as gods or as threats. It was the same pattern that had begun millions of years ago. But for now, Victoria said, they would stay. They would help build humanity's defenses. They would train human soldiers to fight like warriors. They would teach humanity's engineers how to create weapons and shields that could withstand any assault. And when the time came, when humanity was strong enough to defend itself, Victoria and her people would return to their pocket dimension. But humanity would never be forgotten, and humanity would never be helpless again. Lisa received a message from Earth. The Supreme Council wanted to speak with Marcus immediately. They had watched the battle from the surface. They had seen what the interdimensional warriors could do, and they wanted to know what came next. Marcus looked at Victoria and she nodded. Together they accepted the transmission call and prepared to face whatever questions and fears the leaders of Earth would have. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. The transmission from Earth came through clearly. Chairman Robert Gregory's face appeared on the screen, and his expression was a mixture of wonder, fear, and hope all mixed together. He wanted to know everything. He wanted to understand what had happened and what it meant for humanity's future. Marcus explained the battle in simple terms. He told the chairman that the Varathi threat had been stopped. He told him that the invading fleet had been destroyed. He told him that for the first time, humanity had not just survived but had actually defeated an enemy that had seemed completely unstoppable. The chairman was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that everyone was thinking. He asked what humanity owed to Victoria and her people. What price would they demand? What would it cost to keep them as allies? Marcus looked at Victoria, and she stepped forward to answer the question herself. Victoria spoke directly to the camera, addressing not just the chairman but all the people of Earth who would eventually see this transmission. She said that her people did not want payment or treasure. They did not want land or resources or anything material that humans could offer. What they wanted was understanding. They wanted humanity to know that they had been called not as gods or saviors but simply as warriors. They wanted humanity to understand that the threat from the Varathi was not completely gone. It was only delayed. There were more Varathi in other parts of the galaxy, and eventually there would need to be other battles. But more importantly, Victoria said, she wanted humanity to understand something about themselves. She said that humans had the capacity to be so much more than they believed. Humans had built civilizations out of nothing. Humans had created art and music and literature that could move the heart. Humans had looked at impossible situations and found ways to survive. Humans did not need to be engineered or changed to be powerful. They just needed to believe in themselves. After the transmission ended, Marcus left the command center and went to the observation deck. He found Dr. Patterson there, looking down at Earth below them. The planet looked peaceful from up here with its blue oceans and green continents. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, that world had been threatened with extinction. Dr. Patterson turned to Marcus and told him that he had been reviewing all the historical records that Victoria's people had left behind. The records showed that humanity had always been special, even in ancient times, even before spaceflight. Humans had always had this drive to reach beyond what they could see, to dream of things that seemed impossible, and then to make those dreams real. Over the next several weeks, Victoria and her warriors worked with the military forces of Earth to train new soldiers and rebuild the planetary defenses. They showed Earth's engineers how to create weapons that could actually harm a Vorathi warship. They showed them how to build shields that could withstand concentrated energy attacks. They showed them how to design ships that could maneuver and fight in ways that had never been possible before. But it was not just about weapons and shields. Victoria also spent time with Earth's leaders, with scientists, with artists, and with ordinary people. She wanted to understand humanity in all its forms, not just the military aspects. She spent hours in museums looking at paintings and sculptures. She listened to music and asked questions about why certain songs moved people's emotions. She read poetry and philosophy, trying to understand the human heart in a way that her own people had forgotten during their long isolation. One day, Victoria asked Marcus to walk with her through the station. As they walked, she told him about her own childhood, if it could be called that. She had been created fully formed, without infancy or childhood. She had emerged into consciousness already knowing how to fight, already understanding strategy and tactics. She had spent her first 1,000 years in constant battle. But now, after learning about human art and music and culture, she wondered what she had missed. She wondered what it would have been like to grow slowly, to learn gradually, to experience wonder and discovery, instead of just combat and victory. Marcus told her that it was never too late to experience wonder. He invited her to Earth to see the planet in person. Victoria agreed, and they took a shuttle down to the surface. They landed in a city that had been mostly evacuated during the fear of the invasion. But now people were beginning to return. They were beginning to rebuild. When they saw Victoria step out of the shuttle, many people were afraid. But Victoria simply walked through the streets looking at the buildings and the plants and the human faces around her. She stopped in front of a small park where a young girl was playing with a ball. The girl was not afraid of Victoria. She simply asked if Victoria wanted to play. Victoria played with the child for an hour. They threw the ball back and forth. They ran through the grass. They laughed. When it was time for the girl to go home, Victoria knelt down and spoke to her softly. She told the girl that she was stronger than she knew. She told her that the universe would try to tell her what she could and could not do, but the girl should never believe those limitations. She told her that humans were capable of anything if they refused to accept defeat. After the girl left, Marcus and Victoria stood in the park in silence. Marcus asked Victoria if she missed her home in the pocket dimension. Victoria said that she did, but she also understood now that home was not just a place. Home was about being with people who understood you and cared about you. Her people had been alone for so long that they had forgotten this. Being with humanity, learning about their culture and their dreams had reminded them what they had been fighting for all along. The time came when Victoria and her people had to leave. They could not stay in normal space indefinitely. Their presence was changing things, making other species fearful, creating new imbalances in the galaxy. But before they left, Victoria gave Marcus something. It was a crystal about the size of a human fist, glowing with soft blue light. Inside the crystal was encoded every piece of knowledge that Victoria's people had accumulated over millions of years. It was technology, philosophy, art, science, and strategy all combined into one perfect package. Victoria told Marcus that this was the gift of her people to humanity. She said that humanity was no longer the young species learning from their elders. They had proven themselves as warriors. They had proven themselves as survivors. Now they needed to become teachers and leaders themselves. Other species in the galaxy would look to humanity to show them how to stand up to tyranny. Other species would learn from humanity's example that it was possible to fight back against the impossible. The dimensional gateway opened for the return of Victoria and her warriors. One by one they stepped through, disappearing back into their pocket dimension. Victoria was the last to go. Before she stepped through, she looked at Marcus one final time. She told him that she hoped they would never need to call on her people again. She hoped that humanity would grow so strong that they would never face another threat that required the help of legends. But she also told him that if humanity ever truly needed them, they would answer the call. They would always answer because humanity had reminded them what they were really fighting for. They were fighting for hope. They were fighting for the future. They were fighting so that species like humanity could dream their impossible dreams. After Victoria stepped through the gateway, it closed behind her. The dimensional barrier sealed shut. The station felt empty for a moment, as if something vital had been taken away. But Marcus knew that it was not empty. The station was full of hope. The world below was full of hope. Humanity had faced extinction and had chosen to fight. Humanity had called for help from legends and had learned that they themselves were legends too. Marcus looked at the crystal in his hand, glowing softly with the knowledge of ages. He looked down at Earth below, now safe from the immediate threat. He looked out at the stars and understood that humanity's true journey was just beginning. They had survived the darkness. Now they would learn to be the light for others. They would take the gifts they had been given, and they would build a future so great that the Vorathi and all other threats would eventually learn to fear, not the interdimensional warriors, but humanity itself. The age of humanity as victims had ended. The age of humanity as the guardians of their own destiny had begun, and the universe would never be the same. 6 months had passed since Victoria and her people returned to the pocket dimension. The crystal they had left behind sat in a secure chamber deep within Earth's government center, its blue light pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Marcus Sullivan had left his position as captain of the space station and had been brought to Earth to help coordinate humanity's response to the knowledge contained within the crystal. The world had changed in ways that few people had anticipated. The first major change was in how other species in the galaxy viewed humanity. Before the battle with the Vorathi, humans had been seen as young and inexperienced, useful trading partners but not real players in galactic politics. After the interdimensional warriors had defeated the Vorathi fleet, everything changed. Messages started arriving from civilizations across the galaxy. Species that had been hiding from the Vorathi, species that had been enslaved or oppressed for thousands of years, all wanted to know about humanity. All wanted to know if humanity could help them too. Marcus sat in a meeting room with representatives from 7 different alien species. Each one had traveled millions of miles to reach Earth, and each one was asking the same question. They wanted to know if humanity would use the knowledge from Victoria's crystal to help fight against other threats in the galaxy. They wanted to know if humanity would become a protector species, a keeper of peace, a force that stood against tyranny. Chairman Gregory was also in the room, and Marcus could see the weight of these decisions on his face. The chairman looked at Marcus and asked what his recommendation was. Marcus took a deep breath and told the chairman that humanity had been given a great gift, but also a great responsibility. The crystal contained information that could be used to help countless species and to prevent suffering on a scale that was almost impossible to imagine. But it also contained information that could be used for conquest and domination. The choice about what to do with that knowledge belonged to humanity. After the meeting ended, Marcus left the government center and walked through the streets of the city. He passed people going about their daily lives, people who had no idea how much had changed. He passed children playing in parks, people who would grow up in a world where humanity was no longer afraid, where humans stood as equals with the greatest powers in the galaxy. He found himself thinking about what Victoria had told him before she left. She had said that humanity should never let fear dictate their choices. She had said that true power came from the ability to choose mercy when you could choose cruelty. Dr. Aaron Patterson had become the head of the research team that was studying the crystal and extracting its knowledge. The scientist was working around the clock, coordinating with teams of experts from every field of human knowledge. Engineers were studying weapon designs. Doctors were studying medical technology that could cure diseases that had plagued humanity for thousands of years. Physicists were studying the fundamental nature of reality itself, learning principles of science that had not been understood by humans before. One evening, Marcus visited Dr. Patterson in the research facility. The old scientist looked exhausted, but his eyes were bright with excitement. He told Marcus that they had barely scratched the surface of what was in the crystal. He said that Victoria's people had left behind so much knowledge that it would take humanity decades to fully process and understand it all. But even the smallest pieces of information were revolutionary. Dr. Patterson showed Marcus one particular piece of knowledge that had amazed him. It was a medical treatment that could reverse the aging process in human cells. It would not make humans immortal, but it would give them much longer, healthier lives. The scientist told Marcus that within a decade, humanity would be able to eliminate most of the diseases that currently plagued them. Within 2 decades, the average human lifespan could double. Marcus asked what this meant for the future of humanity. Dr. Patterson smiled and said that it meant humanity would have time. time to grow, time to learn, time to become truly great. Throughout all of human history, people had been limited by short lifespans. The greatest minds had only a few decades to make their contributions before aging, and death claimed them. With longer, healthier lives, humans could achieve things that had previously seemed impossible. They could master multiple fields of knowledge. They could see the long-term results of their work. They could become truly wise, not just intelligent. Kevin, the chief engineer, was working on another project based on information from the crystal. He was designing new ships that could travel faster than anything humans had ever built before. These ships would have armor that could repair itself. These ships would have weapons that could defend against almost any attack. Within 5 years, Kevin believed that humanity could have a fleet of ships that could protect not just Earth, but the entire inner planets of the solar system. But there was a darker side to the knowledge as well. Some of the information in the crystal contained weapon designs so powerful that they could destroy entire worlds. Victoria's people had left this information too, not because they wanted humanity to use it for destruction, but because they believed humanity deserved to know the truth about what was possible in the universe. They believed that ignorance was not safety. Knowledge, even terrible knowledge, was better than living under false assumptions about what was and was not possible. Marcus was troubled by this darker knowledge. He raised the question with Chairman Gregory about whether humanity should lock away the most dangerous information from the crystal. The chairman convened a council of world leaders to discuss the question. The debate lasted for weeks. Some argued that the dangerous knowledge should be destroyed completely. Others argued that destroying knowledge was always a mistake, because future generations might need it. Still others argued that the knowledge should be locked away in vaults that could only be opened in the most extreme circumstances. In the end, the council made a decision that reflected something uniquely human. They decided to preserve all the knowledge, but to distribute responsibility for it among many nations and many people. No single person or organization would have complete control over the most dangerous information. This way, if one nation tried to use the knowledge for evil purposes, others could work together to stop them. It was a system built on trust and mutual accountability. Lisa had taken a new position as Earth's official liaison to the other species in the galaxy. She spent her days communicating with ambassadors from dozens of different civilizations. Through these conversations, she learned that the defeat of the Varathi fleet had inspired hope across the entire galaxy. Species that had been hiding in fear were beginning to come out of hiding. Species that had been oppressed were beginning to stand up for their rights. The legend of the interdimensional warriors and the humans who had summoned them was spreading. But Lisa also learned something else. She learned that not all species were grateful or friendly. Some species viewed humanity's new power with suspicion. Some species saw humanity as a threat. Some species had benefited from the Varathi occupation, and now felt vulnerable as that occupation ended. Earth found itself not just as a new player in galactic politics, but also as the center of complex and sometimes dangerous political situations. Marcus attended a ceremony on the surface of Earth where a statue was being erected to honor Victoria and her people. The statue showed a warrior standing tall, with one hand reaching toward the sky. It was meant to represent the courage it took to answer the call for help, to stand beside an unknown species and fight against impossible odds. Thousands of people gathered to watch the statue being unveiled. They cheered and they cried, and Marcus understood why. The statue represented something more than just gratitude. It represented the moment when humanity had refused to surrender. It represented the moment when humans had decided to fight for their future instead of accepting defeat. As the sun set that evening, Marcus found himself thinking about what came next. Humanity had survived the immediate threat. Humanity had been given knowledge and power. But the real challenge was just beginning. Humanity had to figure out how to use this knowledge wisely. Humanity had to figure out how to be the kind of species that Victoria had believed they could be. Humanity had to prove that they deserved the gifts they had been given. Marcus looked up at the stars and thought about Victoria and her people waiting in their pocket dimension. He wondered if they were watching. He wondered if they understood what they had started when they answered humanity's desperate call. Victoria had given humanity more than just warriors. Victoria had given humanity a future, and now it was up to humans to decide what kind of future they would build with it. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, but Marcus found that he was not afraid. He was ready. Humanity was ready. And somewhere in the vast galaxy, other species were beginning to understand that humanity was not just another civilization to be conquered or controlled. Humanity was becoming something new, something unexpected, something that would change the entire course of galactic history.